Hello, I'm Steven Senkaba and you're watching New Vision TV. With me here today is Dr. Lilian Nabulime, a senior lecturer of sculpture and research at the School of Industrial and Fine Art at Makerere University's College of Engineering, Design and Technology. Dr. Nabulime has been using art to promote HIV awareness following a very personal encounter with the pandemic some years ago. Dr. Nabulime, welcome to this interview.
Thank you.
Kindly introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Lilian Mary Nabulime. I was born in Zambia. I've studied through a number of schools, but I think the last ones, the most important, were Makerere College School, then Makerere University, where I did my first degree and second degree, and did my third degree, my PhD at the University of Newcastle in the UK. I'm a lecturer, senior lecturer at the School of Fine Art, and mainly I teach sculpture and research.
When was your first encounter with HIV?
I remember at that time, I think I was at the second high school. Well, we would see people falling sick, but the first encounter which really touched me most is with Philip Bongole Lutaya. And later on, my father also became a victim. He fell sick and died in 1987 when I just graduated. And then later on, I was seeing people very close to me falling sick, some dying. And in 1989, that was my husband, when I knew that was the reality of HIV. Because sometimes, if it's not close to you, you think that it is a distance away, yet it is around you.
How did you deal with the news that your husband had got HIV?
It was a shock because I had traveled. At that time, I was in Namibia on a workshop. Then I come back and he was really looked sick and had been hospitalized in my absence. And when I looked at him, he had all the symptoms. And when I asked him what was bothering him, he said TB. And yet he had all the symptoms of HIV. He had TB, he had lost weight. In those 3 weeks I was away. And then I talked to a friend. I told him, you know, I think we have a problem here at home. Seems Edward has HIV/AIDS. And then this is when this person colleague told me, why don't you go for an HIV test? And I went, had 3 of them in different places, and they were all negative. Then I went back to my colleague and asked him, I'm HIV negative, so what are we going to do? Then he said, you go and ask Edward what is bothering Edward. When I told Edward that I tested HIV/AIDS, all he told me that for him it was only TB. And then somehow I was moving around. Then I met 2 of his doctors. Then I asked them what was bothering with Edward. They said, oh, he has it. And for them, they were just talking casually like that. And yet for me, it was something very important, terrifying. And I knew that I had to handle the situation.
How did this affect your family life?
It did in a way. It did and it didn't. But I think I had to pull up myself because I had to take strong decisions. And then we had a daughter. So there was no way I was going to leave my daughter. And yet the kid grows up balanced when she has their mother and father. So I had to be there for my daughter. So it was tough because I think the most toughest thing is that we didn't have support group. I remember talking to a few of his friends to give us support because most of the time Edward was depressed. Sometimes he was crying, and his friends didn't come out really to assist us. We didn't want money because he had enough money and he was able to afford his medical bills. But what was important is this support, that you have a shoulder to cry on or somebody to give you some good advice. Even to say, don't worry, you'll be okay, you'll be fine, be positive. We didn't have that. And I think maybe Edward lost his life because of not people coming direct to give him support, confronting him. And he kept on worrying because I went behind him talking to his friends. And then one day, I think I told him, when I had went for my PhD, well, that's when I realized that people who are living with HIV/AIDS had counseling groups, but even we had those tussles. Then I told him that, why don't you join these groups? He said, you don't know. I knew. He realized that I didn't know, but I knew because of stigma, people were shunning away from people who are living with HIV/AIDS. And I think probably he thought that by opening up, he would lose his job.
When did you decide to make HIV an important part of your work?
When I went to the UK to study my PhD, because I left when Edward was diagnosed in 1998, so 2000, 4 years without anyone to talk to, having that support. I was that time heading a department, sculpture department, and even there I could not talk about the problem we were going through with Edward. Yet people could see he was sick, and all their mind was that we are all sick, that I was also HIV positive. So because of stress, not being open to having people talk about openly, even colleagues I was working with, I was too stressed. And then I remember the stress worked on me, my immunity went down, and then going to the hospital, one of our clinics, then the doctor, for him, it was because Edward had told him that I was HIV negative. And then that doctor had said, oh, I would have loved to test you. Then I said, well, you can test me, I'm HIV negative. He said, okay. But then time came when I had this small patch, and going back to him and say, and when he tested me, I was negative. Say, oh, you are more sick than the sick man. And that was the doctor telling me. And that was a point which made me think and said, well, if my immunity is running down and I'm sick than the sick man, then that meant that I would die. Then I thought I would become an orphan. And I think that was the turning point to step down from the department. I told one of my colleagues, I'm stepping down. He asked me why. I told him, you know, I'm tired. He said, well, maybe this is the time to go and do a PhD. And then when that spot came on my skin, the same doctor gave me medicine which made the whole skin erupt with spots. And when I went back to him, he always said, you go to the skin specialist. And then me, because I didn't have HIV/AIDS, I didn't care. And then one of my colleagues, he never even asked what was bothering me. All he said, it's not wise, you should put on long sleeves. Meaning that you are HIV positive, please cover up your body. Yet he would have asked what is bothering you, he didn't. And then me, because they're also not coming up to talk to me, I just went and into the wardrobe, picked up Edward's shirts, went into for second hands, and had these long-sleeved blouses. The legs were okay, so then I just left the skin to clear itself. And then that's when I started looking for opportunities to go and study. And I talked to Edward. I told him I need a break. I'm tired. He didn't mind. He even helped me when I was working out, applying to abroad to go to schools. Because the PhD I wanted was a practice-based. I enjoyed developing sculptures, so I wanted something which was practice-based. And then arriving at the University of New York, of course I got the school. Unfortunately, I was able to get funding for my PhD in the UK for 3 years. Arriving in Newcastle, it was a weekend. On Monday I was in the library. Then I said, let me read about women and HIV/AIDS. And when I read a book, it was in the US, women living with partners who had HIV/AIDS, they had gone through the same experiences. The partners were violent, they were not open, and those are the similar experiences I'd gone through. Then I realized that all Edward needed was counseling. And then I could not turn down the money, the 3 years which were meant to be paid for me in the UK, and come back. For me, that was the turning point. I said, let me use my sculptures to educate people about HIV/AIDS. At the University of Newcastle, I started developing sculptures. And I remember the students I was studying with asked me, do your lecturers, your supervisors know that you are working on HIV/AIDS? I said, no. They told me, tell them what is bothering you and why you are making those sculptures. So I started making sculptures which were about my personal experience, the love and care people need, those who are living with HIV/AIDS and those affected. And then 6 months when I had started on the program, the supervisors realized that my knowledge on HIV/AIDS was limited. Then they told me to look for groups. In Newcastle, I could not find any group. I think it's because of the methods of research. So I needed to know how to carry out interviews, these organizations and people living with HIV/AIDS. So I was taken into training because the university would offer such courses. Then later on, I realized that I was in one of the clinics in Newcastle. Then there was a pamphlet in Uganda. The NHSC, the health service for the National Health Service of the UK, had Ugandans who are living with HIV/AIDS. I called a number, then I was able to meet I could talk to some of these organizations. Then one of them invited me to go down to London and talk to them while I was doing HIV research. So that's when I met women who are living with HIV/AIDS, and those were women I had to interview. And then it was also the time I also met Major Balamira. I was introduced to him because the lady who was owning the organization IVO realized that I was also disturbed. I needed some counseling. So that's when I met Major Balamira. And that was also the starting point to work directly with the women who are living with HIV/AIDS.
What has been your most important artwork on HIV and AIDS?
Well, I developed a series of number of works after interviewing those ladies. They told me, I remember asking them how they felt when they had tested HIV/AIDS. They told me that they felt that their lives were shattered. And then I remember also asking these ladies whether they felt they were able to talk openly to their children. Then they said no. I said, now your mother's living with HIV/AIDS, and yet you've produced these children and you don't want to talk to them open about HIV/AIDS. They said, no, we can't. I said, well, we feel embarrassed. Then I asked them, can we use objects in the home which can help us to talk about this problem? They said, maybe. Then through the interviews, I'd reflect on their responses, like shattered. For example, we use mirrors. All these women use mirrors, but when the mirror falls down, then it is what? It shatters. So that gave me the feeling of a shattered mirror when you are told that you are positive. And then they also told me that, well, they talk about the disease, how it was affecting them. So they talked about the pain and the suffering, like there. And then they told me that some of them had got the disease through prostitution. And then because here prostitution is about money, then because I make the basket represents the women, we are the receivers, and that's why most of the infections are among women, because of the nature of our bodies. So I was using materials that allow fluids to come through, like that one, which is more of like sisal. It's a material used in building. And then it has nails, which is suffering. And then one has the ball, or the flat baskets, which have cowrie shells, which would show that money, prostitution. And then above there, you see one with cowrie shells, under it is latex. That means that you are into prostitution, but you are using protection, condom use. And then sometimes, of course, some are vulnerable, they are going into the disease. So I would interpret their stories into artworks. And for example, they are still similar to the balls and infection. One is well covered with latex, which is the material used for condom use. And then we look at that woman there, she has lipstick. And then because the women were telling me that they had come to the UK, they were positive, because they had cancelled and they were well taken care of. But what they worried most was about their families they had left in Uganda. So vulnerability, and then at the same time worrying about their lives, their families in Uganda. So I do interpret it in all those captures. But when I went back to these women in London, when I was analyzing my results, I had asked them if they wanted more information on HIV/AIDS. Then these women said no. For us, we came here in the UK, we've had enough counseling, support, we're on treatments, we don't want more information. Then that was the turning point to realize that the women who needed HIV/AIDS information were the Ugandans. So I took photographs of the work I'd done and came to Uganda. And then the organizations I visited were Nakola, and then reach out. Then through showing them my work in photographs, I asked them, has sculpture been used in HIV/AIDS awareness? The women said no. They don't know what was sculpture about. And mainly Uganda, we don't have art, even sculpture. It is taught in a few schools. Then I went to, that also was a turning point to go to HIV/AIDS organizations to ask them why we're not using sculptures. Then they said, but Lillian, look at your sculpture, because I took along my images. Your sculptures are heavy. Their installations, they are big. They need a lot of space. They cannot use my kind of sculptures in HIV/AIDS awareness and advocacy. And I asked them, what kind of sculptures would you like to use? They said, we need sculptures which are easily multipliable, which are easily movable, which are interesting, which can draw conversation, talk about HIV/AIDS. So then I realized, well, I had done my research, and I had to go back to the University of Newcastle, sit down and think again what material, what objects I could use for HIV/AIDS awareness. And before I boarded the plane at that time, I talked to my mother and asked her, what is the cheapest material Ugandan use? She said, well, soap. I said, why? Yeah, everybody uses soap. Everybody has to bathe. I was in the flight going back to Newcastle, wondering how I could utilize soap. So when I went back to the University of Newcastle, then I had to think of soap. I would buy bars of soap and bring them down to the studios and carve them, but it was all tedious. And then my supervisor said, I think it's high time you go to the market and find out what soaps in the raw form you can come up with. So there was transparent and opaque. So the opaque is these normal soaps we use. The transparent and translucent are this kind of material soap, which is casted, and then you can add objects. So I picked that material, and then I was able to embed objects, and then it was giving me effects, interesting things. But then I said that even the object, the real object for the sculpture has to be meaningful. Then that's when I thought that most of the infections are through heterosexual, that is through the private parts, the male and the female organ. And then I made one. The first pieces I made were very realistic. Then my supervisor said, but Lillian, would your people accept these kind of sculptures? So then I came up with abstract sculpture of a male organ and a female organ. So literally, you would think maybe it is the neck and the lungs. And then the other one was more of like a pear, a fruit. But then I embedded a cowrie shell, which is a symbol for female. So really it came out like male and female. Yeah. So those were the objects I made at that time. And then it was also time to come back to Uganda and test and see if the sculptures were communicating HIV/AIDS. So I brought 100 of them and brought them to Uganda. And then I remember one of my colleagues saying, oh Lillian, what will our people say when they look at these organs, yet they are still in abstract? I said, this is the object I have, and I'm going to find out and see how people react towards it. So I took these soaps and took them back to the women who I had interviewed around 2003 and 2004. So then the women, I started off with the women in Mbuya, and then I didn't know what their reaction would be. because I knew I didn't know, because they had objects, and I thought maybe these objects will stigmatize them. Amazingly, when I gave them I put the soap sculptures on the table, and then the women looked at them, then they started jiggling. I said, hey, what is it? Oh, these are penises and vaginas. I said, okay, now we are in HIV/AIDS. What do you think about these forms in relation to HIV/AIDS? Then the women were talking openly. Oh, this is how the disease had affected my private parts. And for the first time I was hearing private parts being talked openly, and how the disease had affected their private organs. Then I said, well, this is interesting. If these soaps can stimulate people to talk about the disease, then this is relevant. Then I asked them, well, these are soaps. What do you think? They're embedded with objects? Then they started telling me, you know, when there are objects inside those soap sculptures, that means that is disease. And then I said, what about when there's none? Well, maybe that person here is not infected with the disease, or he's on drugs, or the disease is not detectable. And then amazing, they were also able to talk about the CD4 counts, the number of viruses in their bodies. And then they would tell me people they could show those who are sick, very sick, and those who are not on drugs, and those who are dying. So, and then these ladies were not very highly educated, but then this made me realize that with these soaps, you encourage people to discuss, you stimulate them in the discussion, they tell you what they think, and not you imposing your ideas onto them. So whatever they tell you, then you have to analyze and assess whether it is the right or wrong. So that means you have to come along with counselors and doctors. People don't talk openly about penises and vaginas publicly. So I think that is the negative problem about them. But among the elites, they feel shy. They don't want to talk openly. When I put these sculptures in front of people who are highly educated, they feel shy and embarrassed. But for these other people, the young, the children, the youth, they get on well along with them. Then they are able to talk and discuss.
How has your art changed the lives of poor communities?
I've kept in touch with the women who are the Nakola women nation. The Nakola women who I worked with when I was starting off my research. So I keep on going back to them. And when they have issues, or when they want me to work to display the soap sculptures of a workshop, they invite me, and I take the soap sculptures to encourage debates on HIV/AIDS. For example, in 2015, they came to me and they said, we have a problem. I said, what is it? The children who are born with HIV/AIDS are dying. I said, what is the problem now? They are not taking that drugs. Then I asked them, what is the problem? It's peer pressure. Because they worry when the others are seeing them taking the drugs. I said, now what can we do? They said, can we bring those soaps and we have a workshop? So I organized, and then we had a workshop in Zambia with some of those children. I think we had between 10 and 20 a group. And then we had the women and them as counselors. So then we had to bring these soaps out and then involve the children and talk about HIV/AIDS.
What has been the greatest impact of your artwork in promoting HIV awareness?
The children, because these soaps have been there for a while, so the beans which I had put in as objects, but of course these were symbolic seeds about germination, life. And then with time, because soap, the glycerin soap, the transparent soap I use for the soap sculptures, has moistures. So the beans start rotting, or even the nails start rusting. So eventually, with time, the sculptures start deteriorating and falling apart. So which brings out the real essence of HIV/AIDS, how it destroys the body. That without taking the drugs, you are dying slowly. So that was an important message to the children, to the youth, that they have to stick to their drugs and not give up.
What future plans do you have to promote your work using HIV/AIDS?
I think because being a lecturer at the university, I have so much passion about HIV/AIDS, and then you are taken away by teaching students. Of course, you have a curriculum. The HIV component is that when I'm teaching my students, definitely I talk to them about HIV/AIDS. But then you realize that you are not teaching, and then you realize that the advocacy you would have done, you don't have much time. Sometimes you're on a plane, traveling, or you are going to give presentations about the work, and then at times I felt that my advocacy using my sculptures in Uganda is less. But this year, looking at when I was reading, I think last year, for 2 years now, the numbers of women living with HIV/AIDS or getting infections is increasing. And then the most affected are the youth. Then that brings me down and say now I should find time and carry on this work, because I still have a few soft sculptures, and eventually if I can run some funding, then maybe I can take on a bigger board. But then because of the nature of the forms, and that also gave me some hindrance, because for me I totally knew that most our infection are through the hetero part, the organs, and yet people don't want to talk about it. So I've been asked if I can come up with another model, and I've thought so seriously over time, years, I've thought seriously. I don't see if I can come with another form, because when I produced those sculptures, I had put a lot of research and time. Then maybe when I'm carrying on next interviews, I would like to see if you can come up with another model which doesn't carry taboos. But on the other hand, I think we should overcome our taboos and fight the disease openly by not shying away, because the more we shy away, that's why we are getting more infections. Because we see drugs working, that people who are living with HIV/AIDS look better than what they used to be in the past. Then there's this assumption that the disease is not there anymore. The reality is the disease is there, and the drugs, because now we are seeing these doctors who are striking, and the HIV people are very worried. So we don't want to be in those scenarios. And even still, the HIV drugs are expensive. So let us reduce on the numbers. Those who have come into contact with my soft sculptures, when they look at those pieces, they start reflecting on themselves.
It encouraged me a lot to continue taking my medicine, because once I saw the soaps, it had pictures, fearing pictures, and encouraging pictures. The encouraging one, they were adhering, taking my medicine good for a better future, removing the fear, and others.
The way she came up with the other system of that sculptures, it helps us. When we saw it, it makes the work easy, because by that time I was on the level of counselors to talk to our children, even to other women living with HIV. But it makes our work very easy to talk of, because if it is there, everyone can open up and tell you, this means what, this means this means this, you have to do this, you look at this one. It is very good.
I have learned a lot from the exhibition that she showcased. I've learned how to open up. I'm not an AIDS victim, but it's not that I'm also 100% safe. But I've learned how to open up. I've learned how to be confident about myself in such cases like this, because the more you reserve yourself on such matters like this, the sicker you become.
And then I remember students coming in, people were coming, walking around, walking too, passing by. They were attracted by these captures which were in the container. And whoever who came into the container, they started asking, oh, where can we go for HIV testing? That meant they reflected on the soap captures, and then they wanted to know where the services are. And then at the end of that, that made me realize that these soap captures are good for counselors. And then when people look at them, they want to have the services of the counselors. And if they have counselors and testers, and then the doctors. So you need all the three people working together.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That has been the story of Dr. Lilian Nabulime, whose art has been at the heart of the HIV/AIDS struggle. Thank you very much.